Bringing you the top stories from Bonners Ferry to St. Mary's and everywhere in between, this is the North Idaho Prepcast with Ryan Scaggs.
That's right, another edition of the North Idaho Prepcast, your weekly breakdown for everything Districts 1 and 2 up north in the state of Idaho. Brandon Baney is always joined by Ryan Scaggs, wearing his best Boise State Broncos t-shirt today.
Yep. I spent enough money there that I figure I can at least wear the clothing. So,
you should get free swag if you go to school there, right?
Yeah,
it's the least they can do.
I'd take some free stuff. I don't know. I transferred after 3 years, but yeah. So you don't find much LCSE stuff up here. So
you were ahead of your time. You entered the portal, Ryan.
That's right. Yeah, I entered the transfer portal like I guess everybody else has. So, I guess we're holding our breath to when it hits the high school ranks, huh?
Yes, that'll never happen. Of course, there are rules.
I hope not.
there's rules in place now. If you transfer, you got to sit out 90 days, which is a semester. So
yeah,
if you're going to transfer schools and you don't live in that school district, think long and hard about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that was something that, like, when I was in school, because we'd have kids that would move from like Asotin to Clarkston or vice versa. It's like if you moved in the state of Washington, you were ineligible for varsity sports that following school year, and unless you can either pose a hardship or a legit family move. I like those rules. I think that they keep things from the competitive balance being swayed by kids coming up with random excuses, but that's me having my get off my lawn moment. But
well, and speaking of get off my lawn, we are just getting started because this week on the North Idaho Prepcast, it is our off-season think tank. Now, you may be thinking, off-season? We're right in the middle of spring sports season. Well, as we talked about on last week's show, everybody up north was on spring break last week. Like there were no games, no competitions. There was nada. And so, yeah, we could talk about what happened Monday and Tuesday this week. We're recording this on Wednesday, April 6th, but man, that'd be a really short prepcast. There was some exciting stuff that happened earlier this week as teams got back into the swing of things. Orofino with a nice walk-off win over Grangeville. I think it was Grangeville or Genesee. I can't remember now. But anyways, Maniacs got a walk-off win. But with so little happening last week, we're like, what are we going to talk about? And Ryan, you've been working on this for a couple of months now, but you've kind of been putting together this plan to improve the way things are done, especially when it comes to you're laughing. I'm trying to say it as nicely as I can. Trying to improve the way things are done when it comes to representation, but also trying to get the best teams to state. Now, this was something that cropped up during soccer season when Sandpoint's girls didn't make it. Volleyball, when we had a lot of very good teams up north that weren't able to qualify, and especially this year in basketball, and I think immediately to girls basketball, where Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, and Lake City all should have been at state. Only Lake City and Post Falls got to go. So Ryan, I'm gonna just open up the floor to you. I know you've taken copious notes. Can you hold up your notes for the viewers?
They're not as substantial today, but I've got some of this stuff too. So
perfect.
I've got things. I've got stuff and things to speak on. So
stuff and things.
Me trying to sound important, play some highfalutin music in the background or something like that. I don't know, but
you know what? I think that's the title for this week's episode: "Stuff and Things."
How to make people from Preston very angry.
Okay, yeah. So go ahead, because this has been a big topic statewide on social media as well, particularly from a few vocal fans in East Idaho. So.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, am I for expansion of the state tournament? No, I'm not. I'm not proposing that we leave the 8-team format in most sports. Outside of, obviously, I know football's a bit different, but for the most of the sports that they have a 8-team tournament, and then you have your allotments from each district. I'm a huge proponent of, if you have a 3-team district, you should not be in a district. You should be like the district 1 and 2. And I'll propose it this way, as far as thinking is, we're too rigid by just limiting ourselves to a 6-district system. And in saying that is that if you have a district, say like, let's go example, and you could pick on District 3, but I'm going to pick on District 4 and the 1A D2, where you have that many schools that are in that district. You could easily break that into 2, or you could leave it the same, and you could combine, say, 5 and 6 together that are geographically pretty close for the most part. That would give you, you have 5 teams in District 5, and you have 4 teams in District 6. Or sorry, did I say 3 and 5? Yeah, 3 and 4. So you'd have a 7-team district essentially if you created a District 8, which would be just for 1A D2. And this is what the state of Washington did. And I don't necessarily think the state of Washington does a lot of things well when it comes to high school athletics, but I do agree with this, was that they had specific districts, and some of them were just very specific to a classification. So in the state of Washington, you would have like District 9 was all of the 1B and 2B schools. I believe it was District 9, yeah. And you could go like District 8. At least this is when I was back in high school. Like District 7, I know, was the GSL. So you'd have the 4A Washington schools and the 3A Washington schools in the Spokane area would be in District 7. So you could end up with like essentially like 9 to 10 districts, but you would end up setting yourself up to getting rid of a lot of these automatic bids where you'd have like a 3-team District 5 that you could have all 3 teams with a pretty decent record in, say, basketball, for example, where all 3 teams could potentially say that they have a case for state. Well, if they would combine with District 6, that would be a substantial district that you could have a bigger tournament, and then you could actually get a bigger draw instead of like getting 1 bid from District 5, District 6 and 5 combined to create, like, say, District 7, right? We'll just throw arbitrary numbers out there. But they combine, maybe they get 3.5 bids. So then you expand the amount of teams that you get, or maybe you get 4.5 bids, because if you look at District 3 and how many bids they get to state, to where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 schools, and they're getting 4.5 bids to state. I would say that it would be pretty easily to be matched if you had a 10-team district from East Idaho, for example, to say that, yeah, we want 4 legit bids, and then you're saying that your 3 teams that came from the old District 5, you could realistically say, outside of Hillcrest, they're better than most of the other teams in that district. And so you're able to get the correct teams based on competition. It changes the district tournaments a little bit. I know this creates some travel issues, but really, I mean, it's the state of Idaho, for good grief. We're shaped, pretty awkwardly, that it's going to create travel snarls a little bit no matter what you do. But if we're about getting the right teams to state or the right competition level, I really look at either expanding our district format as being our first immediate thing that we could address, and it would probably alleviate some of these problems.
Yeah, so let's use 4A as an example, because that's where the most vocal fans have been about this. Where in 4A, and this is the North Idaho Prepcast, but to talk about this, we're gonna have to use teams from all over.
We got to pull everybody from the state that's got interest in this and sit everyone at the table.
Right. So in 4A this year, you had District 5, which had Preston, Pocatello, and Century. All 3 teams were ranked in the top 5 in the coaches polls. At one point in time, they were all 3 in the top 10 in the Max Preps rankings. And because it was a 3-team district, only 1 team got to advance to state. And that was Pocatello, and they got all the way to the championship. And so Preston and Century fans were like, man, that sucked, to put it mildly. And I agree. So you're proposing not expanding the playoffs or having play-in games, but you're saying, why can't districts 5 and 6 in East Idaho come together? Because they're close enough. Hillcrest played Preston this year in a home and away in boys basketball. So it's not a travel problem. No. They're willing to travel for these things. And you're right. If you took the 5 teams that are in District 6 plus the 3 teams from District 5, now you've got an 8-team league. Mm-hmm. It makes having a postseason a lot easier, right? Hey, 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7. And you probably get 2.5 bids to state. Now this year, District 5 got 1 bid, District 6 got 1.5, and there's your 2.5 bids, right? So the number of bids potentially wouldn't change, but the teams that are getting those bids could change in a substantial way. Now, the problem with that is the teams in District 6 don't want to lose those bids to the teams from District 5. And so the way the rules are in place, I don't blame them. because they're fighting for their representation, right? You potentially would have like a Blackfoot, which got to the state play-in game and could have gotten to state. They probably don't make it if they're playing in a big league with the teams from District 5. And they want to protect their right to try and advance the state. The same thing happens in the 3A ranks with Districts 5 and 6 with Snake River, and Sugar Salem, and they want to protect their golden ticket to state. And instead of saying, let's play the best competition and see who advances, they say, yeah, you know what? Let's just stick to our district where we've got a better chance to get to state. And again, I'm not knocking anybody for that, because that's playing the rules. That's playing the system to your advantage. Until the governing body of high school athletics steps in and regulates this, it'll never change. Unfortunately, when the individual conferences are in charge of who is a member of our conference and who isn't, it'll never change.
Yeah. The other thing about this too is, I've kind of came up with like 3 pseudo solutions. My third one that we'll close with is the one that's a little more ridiculous, but at the same time, I think it's going to actually make some sense too. But it's going to, like you said about representation, kind of probably rub people the wrong way. But in doing this, like if you're looking at 5 and 6 in Eastern Idaho, if you want to look at if they're going to complain about geographical footprint, quit crying. You've got look at District 2 and District 1 in North Idaho, where next year you'll have a team in Priest River having to travel for a league game all the way to Grangeville. I mean, that's a league game next year in sports, as Priest River is dropping down to 2A. So if you want to cry about geographical like unfairness, I'm sorry, but North Idaho's got you beat like 10 times out of 10 as far as that argument goes in most cases. I think the only ones that would really get close is that you could look at like District 4 and 1A D2. That's a pretty huge geographical footprint for that district. But even in saying that, I mean, you look at some of these smaller ones, you could actually reshuffle some of these and have them make a little bit more sense instead of sticking with your historical, boundaries that have been in place. If you allow the number of districts to expand, and specifically to classifications, it could, serve you well. As far as, why hasn't the SIC split into 2 conferences? That's like, let's look at that. If we really want to do about numbers or whatever and make the regular season mean something, why haven't they split into 2 different conferences? The 5A and the 4A ranks. You could look at 1A D1. Why hasn't that split in District 3? We've got a ton of leagues down there. Or a ton of teams in that conference down there. So if we're going to talk about growth being an issue in the state of Idaho because of population increasing and schools are going to grow, we're going to have to look at expanding things. We can't just stick rigid and think that things are going to work themselves out. So if we're going to have added schools, like with the addition of Hawaii and new schools being built in the Treasure Valley and elsewhere, I know that in Eastern Idaho, they've added a few new schools in the last few years, like Thunder Ridge. And so, if we're looking at things like that, we've got to be cognizant as we get more charter schools and everything else that there's expansion's going to have to take place. This isn't going to be a sustainable system long-term if we think that we're going to level the playing field and the best teams are going to continue to make it every year.
Yeah. And somebody told me, and I don't remember who it was, but it came from a pretty good source, I think. They told me that the current system we have, District 1 through 6, it mimics the Idaho Department of Transportation.
Yep,
does that sound right?
It does.
Okay, and that's why they created that originally. Well, okay, the ITD already came in and said, yeah, here's the districts. Let's just follow that. But you're right. I think you have to be fluid with it. So I grew up in Montana, obviously, and for a while I lived in Nebraska and covered high school athletics there. And what they do is they try to make the conferences at each classification level as even as they possibly can. And sometimes that means, like in Montana, a team has to travel 5 hours to play a conference game. But they build in some of that budget and say, we can help with that.
Yeah.
And in Nebraska takes it one step further. So in Montana, they have hard, rigid enrollment numbers like Idaho does. And then from there, they look at how many AA, how many A, B, C teams are there. And let's try and make as many even conferences. And basically it's like a north, south, east, and west. And let's make them as even as we can. And then that way everybody gets 2 bids to state. It's an 8-team state tournament. and you've got your chance. In Nebraska, they take it a step further, and they say the enrollment numbers to determine classifications, those are kind of fluid. We're going to take the 32 largest schools, and they are automatically Class A schools. Then we're going to take the next 32 schools, and they're automatically Class B. So a team could be, and they do this every 2 years. So a team that's in the largest classification one year could find themselves in the smaller classification the next year. But they do that, and again, it's 32 teams, and they say, all right, let's divvy it up into 8 4-team sub-districts that are part of 4 overall larger districts. So it's even, uniform, kind of like the NFL in a way.
Yeah. No, and I totally agree with that. And, that was actually the argument I was going to start closing with, is if we start looking at our enrollment numbers closer. But I mean, since you brought it up, it's a great place to go with it, I think, is that, you look at the enrollment gap at 4A. I mean, you're telling it's a 639 student gap between the largest 4A school and the smallest 4A school. And I know that there's the gap between the smallest 4A and like the smallest 3A, but realistically, like, we've got to come to a solution that, like, we're going to have to get, unless we fix the district situation, we might look at getting rid of a classification. And I mean, numbers wise, if you want to go by hard numbers and being able to evenly split these things, and like you said, we'll take the 22 largest schools and the next 22, then the next 22, then the next 22, and then whatever we're left with at the end, that's 1AD2. That would make a little bit more sense to do it that way. If we're going to let our classifications be fluid, because if you look at the 2018 enrollment, which is what we ran with, I think, until this next year, was like the 2018 through 2022 enrollment block. There was 19 5A schools, 28 4A schools, 23 A schools, 21 2As, and so on. Now it's changed to where, next year we'll have 23 5A, 25 4A. So the playing field's starting to level a little bit at the top end, but then you still have 23 A schools. You have 28 2A teams, 34 1AD1, and then 38 1AD2 schools. So like, you can look at this, and is there a big enough difference at, say, 2A from the entire 2A class to the top half of 1AD1? Is there enough difference there that you could say, what? And I know that football makes a difference for safety issues with playing 11-man to 8-man. So that does play into it. But why can't we be flexible with the other sports? Why can't we have, the dividing line for 2As that if you look at the top, and I was kind of breaking down the numbers as far as enrollment, is that you've got the bottom part of 2A playing 11-man football, and you have like the top, I wanted to say it was the top 12 teams at 1AD1, and the enrollment difference was literally 13 kids. And so it's like, you're telling me you can't play 11-man football with some of these teams, or and I know that the 2A teams, some of them are scrapping to try to get an 11-man team out there. I totally get that. So maybe it's either we give the option to opt down to 8-man from the 2A, like at some of this level, or maybe we just say, you know what, 2A needs to go. We need to split that up. The top half goes into 3A. The bottom half goes into 1AD1. We get rid of a classification, or maybe it's 3A that we get rid of. The top half goes into 4A. The top third of 4A goes to 5A. So you lower that ceiling a little bit, and it closes the enrollment gap. Instead of 639, it would actually go to, if you split 3A in half and took the upper half and gave it to 4A and took the ceiling off of 4A, you would close that gap to 550. And so, like, to me, that makes a little bit more sense. Of getting rid of a classification somewhere would realistically make the most sense to level the playing field as far as enrollment goes. I know competition-wise, that's always not the case. We'll throw Wood River, for example, like opting down to play 3A football. And then some of the 1AD1 teams opting down to 1AD2 just for travel reasons. But, I think, if we're not going to adjust districts, we need to look at our classification numbers. We need to readjust and go out of the 6 classification system and go to a 5. Personally, that's just how I think.
I agree. And again, I'm the new guy here.
Yeah,
in terms of like IdahoSports.com personnel, in terms of total years in the state, like I got to be at the bottom. It's only my 3rd year in Idaho, right, Ryan? You've been in Idaho a lot longer than that, so I'm leaning on you a little bit for this. But under the old system, before we went to 5A, 4A, 3A, and it was A1,
A1, A2, A1.
A3.
Yeah.
Weren't there only 5 classifications?
Yeah.
And then
I think there was only 5.
When they made the shift, then they added that 6th one, if I'm remembering that correctly. And because like my father-in-law, he's from St. Mary's, and he talks about all the time. Yeah, when I was in school, we were in a league with Kellogg, and Lakeland was a 3A back then, but they were like essentially a 3A. They were A3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is kicking some of those 2A teams like a St. Mary's up to 3A.
Yeah.
But
kicking the bottom half of 3A down to 2A, kicking Kellogg down, kicking Priest River down. I mean, that's also part of what I'm talking. I mean, you could be kicking Timberlake up.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at numbers wise, that there's, Timberlake already plays Lakeland in every sport. I mean, is there a big difference between Timberlake and Sandpoint? I mean, in football, yes. In girls basketball, no, not really. I mean, softball, I would say no. Like, there's the playing field is a little bit more level outside of football. And then the question is, okay, fine. Do we make a football only classification system?
That's the big elephant in the room, because every other sport, you're right, besides football, the competition level, it pretty much checks out. Like under this system, Pocatello would go back to being a 5A school. Well, guess what? They played Lake City pretty darn close at the Owyhee Classic in December, right? We've seen St. Mary's beat 3A teams.
St. Mary's won the 4A IEL.
Right. So outside of football, and even in football, you see occasionally a smaller school will beat a bigger school, like West Side at the 2A level beat some 3A teams this year. But that is the one. So I agree. Maybe a football only system isn't, that's what Wyoming does. That's another state that I've lived in, where they tweak the numbers a little bit for football only. And then in basketball and all the other sports, it's kind of just the regular numbers. So
yeah, it goes based off of your participation numbers.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm all for that. I mean, you may have a couple 1A D1 teams that have, 40 kids turn out. They'll have more kids than some 4A schools. So I mean, like, we really want to, and kudos to those coaching staffs to get that many kids that turn out. That's a huge, participation number. It's a large percentage of your population able to play that sport. But, if we go, we may have to think outside the box. Geographically, we're kind of limited because, the state does have that weird split in the middle, or Idaho County and Valley County, and everything kind of runs together and nobody lives there. Yeah, we get it. Like from Riggins North and, from Horseshoe Bend, Treasure Valley, that way. I mean, you have very few teams between that gap. You might have Council and a few other schools, but along the Highway 95 corridor. But, we've got to think outside the box if we're going to fix this problem.
Well, and that's a great point, that there's going to be a lot of hand wringing over the travel. These are it's happening already. I talked to Grangeville's football coach, Coach Adams, during the playoffs this year, and I said, "Boy, you had a gauntlet of a schedule." And we talked about that on the Prepcast, week in, week out, where, boy, they're playing up all these 3A schools, and they're
playing
just
Washington 2A teams.
They're getting beat up every week, and they'll probably win their league, but their max preps ranking is going to be low. And I said, did you put this tough schedule together to try and boost your max preps ranking? And he looked at me and he went, heck no. He said, we did it because we have to play the schools that are somewhat closer. You think I wanted to go play 3A Weiser and get our butts kicked? No, but guess what? They're kind of close to us, so we did it. So they're already making that trip down that corridor, through Riggins, to play some of those teams from District 3.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, if you want to go, and I think football makes the most sense to have its own classification system. It really does. I mean, if you look at it travel wise and look at it competition wise too. I mean, could Sandpoint play a 5A schedule? Yeah, I think they could. I mean, we saw what they were able to do against Coeur d'Alene and Lewiston and Lake City, and Post Falls. They in my mind, I mean, well, not really, but realistically, they won the IEL 5A too, in addition to the 4A. So you could have a 4 or 5 team conference, maybe even a 6 if you throw Lakeland in the mix, a 6-team conference at the upper level. And then you've got teams like the size of Moscow, which is pretty similar in enrollment size to Timberlake. There's only like 150 kid difference in the school size. Participation numbers, Timberlake has more kids playing football than Moscow does. You look at Kellogg's right in the mix. Bonner's Ferry is right in the mix to being on the cusp of up and coming and size wise too. And they'll play, those teams will play each other. You look at St. Mary's played Lakeland, a 4A team in football this year. So does it make sense to adjust some of these numbers? Absolutely. It has to. I mean, Post Falls, I think at some point this year is going to be voting on a new high school to where they will have a second high school in their district. So, you're looking at another team being thrown into District 1, realistically a 4A size school. So, which it'll also take an enrollment hit to Post Falls High School too. So it'd be interesting to see. And then Coeur d'Alene's on the cusp of adding another school too. So it's, we're hitting that time where we've got to take a realistic look at things and be able to adjust these and either fix the problem, or we're just going to keep complaining year after year, and it's going to hurt. I mean, after a while, it might hurt the bottom line for IHSAA.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about this more, I really like the idea of going to 4 divisions in each classification and make them as even as possible. And guess what? Each one gets 2 teams to state. And are there years where East Idaho is going to be stronger than North Idaho? Yes. But at least then, if you don't win the district tournament, you've got a second bid that you can take. And then at that point, if you can't get that second bid, that's on you. That's on you as a team. Yeah. And yeah, travel wise, would that make it difficult? Yeah. Could you see like Timberlake and Weiser possibly being in the same, district, quote unquote, for even numbers' sake? Yes.
Lewiston played in the SIC back when I was in high school. Lewiston was the only 5A school in North Idaho, and they're playing Boise schools every week. So, I mean, it's been done.
Yeah. And you could, I mean, that's where you could start meeting in the middle for some of these things too, right? It's a 6-hour drive from Rathdrum to Weiser. Okay. You drive 3 hours. We'll drive 3 hours.
Playing Grangeville.
Let's seriously, they do that for these playing games already. So,
well, and the thing is too, like, look at the other sports like basketball, for example, where they build in those games over winter break. Is it okay? Fine, have a league. If you're going to have that, have some of your district games that you may have to have an overnighter for districts, like during Christmas break or around that time, or around a 3-day weekend. They're able to build in the travel time. Or build it around like your in staff days to where you don't have a Friday school. So, okay, you can travel on a Thursday, you get a Friday, Saturday double header back to back and come back home. Like there's ways of going about this that can fix the problem, because we've been adjusting things even due to COVID. I think allows us a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah. And like during basketball, a good cost saving measure, you take your boys and your girls and you play a doubleheader. That's very common up north where you are. Yeah. But boy, around the rest of the state, there was some real resistance to that. And
I didn't know that wasn't a thing everywhere else. Like nobody plays boys and girls doubleheaders in Idaho outside of north of Riggins.
Yeah. And that's crazy to me that, like I said, every other state I've lived in, boys and girls basketball starts on the same date. They run concurrently. And a lot of the schools choose to do double headers. It's
like
it's
the state of Washington. The state of Washington, just in the 2A classification, has 66 high schools. So that's just in one classification, right? And I know Washington population-wise is way bigger, but using that example, I mean, they play boys and girls games doubleheader and they switch. So when they do home and homes in their league schedule, the boys play first in one game at somebody's school. Well, then they're going to play second on the road, and then they flip-flop every year. So the girls and boys always get like not the unfair advantage of always playing second or first or whatever, but it helps adjust and offset some of that difference that, you don't want to force your team to get home at 2:00 in the morning, on a Thursday night game.
Yeah.
But, there's ways around it. So, and one of the other propositions that I had that, we can discuss too is, okay, if you want to expand state, quote unquote, we'll call it a quote unquote expansion, get rid of the district. If you want your league's title to mean anything, get rid of the district tournament. I don't know if we're going to make the league mean something. Well, I don't know why we still play district tournaments. Then take your league champs or however the league finishes, and then you have a 16-team tournament. Like it's your state tournament, but the first round is a state play-in game essentially to set your field of 8 for the state tournament. And doing that expansion alone, just taking your district 1 and 2 for girls basketball, for example, that means Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, and Post Falls are all basically going to get in because it's going to be seeded based on max champions automatic in. They're going to host a region. So like you're going to have the region 1 could be played at Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, Post Falls, North Idaho College. I don't care, wherever, pick a location, right? New Lewiston High School or LCSE. So there's a district or a regional location that's going to host 2 games. It's going to host one play-in game with the 1 seed, and then you're going to have the 2nd seed from that region that's going to host another, like say the 5 or the 4 seed from District 3 or whatever. But you're going to essentially turn it into a 16-team tournament, but it's a loser out first round. So like you win to get in, and then once you get to state, it's a loser. It's a double elimination essentially.
Right.
But you're not adding any extra days of the tournament. You're not adding any extra travel than what you would already do for a play-in game. So I don't understand why we're so rigid to like not look at this maybe as the expansion, because then you're going to get those teams of like Century playing, I'm starting like CUNA. Like Century playing CUNA, or CUNA's a 5A. It's a bad example.
Well, okay, so
Century playing Valley View. Century gets their crack at making the state tournament. Their legit chance. If they beat Valley View, they're in. And then we seed based on max preps. Everybody's in. Everybody's happy.
Yeah, the people who say, "Oh, the travel, we can't have teams be traveling like that."
Please,
that it makes no sense to me. If you really wanted to cut down on travel, this is the first state I've been in, Ryan, where a district tournament like takes 2 weeks to complete. Like in Montana and Wyoming, it's like, hey, we are all going to come to this mutually agreed upon neutral site, and we are all going to hash it out. It's going to be a 3 or 4 day tournament, and it's going to be like a state tournament. We're all converging on this one location, and we're playing it instead of Lewiston driving to Coeur d'Alene, then 2 nights later driving back to Coeur d'Alene. Then you know what I'm saying? Like so the travel part of it, that doesn't compute to me, because there's definitely ways you could streamline that process and make it.
Oh, how dare we have to drive from Boise to Twin Falls? Okay, Crimea River. That's a 2.5 hour bus trip, or 3 hours tops. I'm like, I was a kid growing up in Eastern Washington to where like we had a league game. It was a 5-hour bus ride for a league game. Yeah. Like, and that's like on a Tuesday, you'd have a wrestling match. You'd leave class at like 9 o'clock in the morning. You're not getting home until 2:30 in the morning. And then you got to go to class the next day. And, so it's like, that's not the situation we're looking at here. You want to cry about, and you can play it the weekend before state and still seed the state. You don't lose any extra days. Like you can play it a Friday, Saturday at neutral site locations or wherever you want to do it. You can have it set preemptively ahead of time where the North goes to LCSE, the, SIC plays at either one of the high schools, or they can play. Obviously it would have been hard to play it like say College of Idaho because of having their playoff run, but you can have alternate sites available. You can play it, College of Southern Idaho. You can play one of the big, nice new high schools on the east side, or in the eastern part of the state. So there's options everywhere to do this. And especially really it's the biggest issue that we're seeing. It's at the higher ranks. It's at 5A and 4A. That's really where everybody's complaining for the most part. 2A to a little bit extent, but not much. You've got a 3-team bid league as it stands between St. Mary's, Grangeville, and Orfino. How many years have we had that we're asking for more than one team out of that district? How many times has that happened in the last 20 years? Maybe once. So, I don't think people are crying too much about this. I think that, like there's some easy solutions, but it's going to take people like, okay, if we want to fix the problem, let's fix the problem. If we don't, then quit crying, because if you're worried about protecting your soccer team, but your basketball team is getting hosed, or your volleyball team, or vice versa, like you're using basketball as an excuse to like keep your representation, but then you're selling out your volleyball team the year that they go, 14-4 and they miss the state tournament because they lost in districts. That's on you. Like, I don't know. Like some of this is just people need to have cooler heads, but I think realistically, some of the proposals that I've listed here, I think solve the problem. They really do.
I think you have to, in a state the size of Idaho, to implement what we're talking about, every team is going to have to travel at some point.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Why is it, and this is kind of a little off topic, but the fans up north are going to agree with me on this. So you live in North Idaho, I live in East Idaho. How come every year for basketball we have to go to Boise?
Yeah.
Well,
Which
it's
is
in
great.
it's in the middle. So it's 3
Yeah.
hours from the north. It's 3 hours from the east. It's a central location. Okay. But
Because you have
every
13 high schools at one classification that are saying, look, we don't want to move.
every year then the teams up north and the teams from the east are having to pay to drive to Boise. The Boise schools never have to factor that into their budget. That's to me, that's not fair.
There's no hotel cost. There's no,
there's
I
no,
mean, you know how expensive it is to charter a bus now with the price of diesel fuel too? I mean, kudos to all those teams that went down to Southern Idaho and played baseball 2 weeks ago, but they were all sharing buses. Like you'd have 2 high schools sharing buses going, or you'd have the baseball and softball team on one bus.
yeah.
And that's just the way you've got. I mean, there's ways around it. I mean, you can bring a travel buddy with you for goodness sakes. If you're going to come play up north, bring one of your other teams with you. You're only traveling with 12 for basketball or 13 maybe. Like, okay, 2 teams on a bus, go. Like, I don't get the problem.
and there's this argument that well, there's not enough venues for East Idaho to host or North Idaho to host. And it's like, really though, for basketball, you're just playing at 5A high schools, except for the Idaho Center. And there are big enough arenas.
Dude, the new arena at the University of Idaho is gorgeous. Are you kidding me?
Yes. And you could play in East Idaho easily at a big arena and then have, the surrounding bigger high schools host. So to me, there's no reason why, and it's not just basketball, every state event should rotate.
Absolutely. It does in football. I mean, why is football the only one? I mean, volleyball does it too. They do rotate for the most part, but they rotate classification on where they are for the most part. But I mean, lately it's been all up north. But I mean, some of the other, sports, like, why can't we spread the wealth? I don't get it. Like wrestling, especially, that, I know that they've been using Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival as a reason of why the Kiwi Dome can't host the state wrestling tournament. And that's kind of been alleviated in the last couple of years. Now it's not landed on the same weekend. So why can't the North host state wrestling? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's hard to ask the same teams to constantly travel all the time. And
it's not realistic.
Yeah.
But, I get it. Like, and some states do have rigid, like, state isn't this location every year. And I get that part. Like Washington, the 3A and 4A's play in the Tacoma Dome, the 2A's and 1A's play in the Yakima Sun Dome, and the B's play in Spokane Arena. Like Washington has the luxury of having those venues to their advantage. But, why can't Idaho do the same thing? Why do we have to have them all in the same town? I don't get it. Why do 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A, and 1A D1 all have to be in Boise at the same weekend?
Right. And that's how Montana is too. There's basically, 7 big cities, really 8 big cities in Montana that can all host. And that's what they do. So one year, boys and girls for this classification will be in this city. Boys and girls for a second classification will be in this second city. And they rotate, the sites. It's in different parts of the state all at the same time. And I guess what I've heard is that, like, for media, boy, it sure is nice having it all in one place and we can get to everything and cover everything. Whereas, if it were spread out over the state, a media company may have to send a guy to this tournament and a reporter to this tournament. And I guess
if there was a media outlet that had people that could broadcast around the entire state of Idaho.
Yeah, but we're kind of the unicorn in that regard, right, Ryan? Like
facetiously, but yeah.
Right. like a lot of our media comrades in television, newspaper, whatever, the resources are dwindling. The staffs are getting smaller and smaller through no fault of their own. Good media employees are being laid off at an alarming rate, and it's all to save a penny. So I get it from that media perspective. It is nice to have everything in one place where you can kind of cover everything, but you can still have it in North.
Yeah, North. I mean, you got the Coeur d'Alene Press, you've got the Lewiston Tribune, you've got newspapers all around. You can use that. The internet exists for a reason. For goodness sakes, like let's use it to our advantage. If that's going to be our excuse, that's a pretty lame one in 2022. And I'm just going to call out people that want to use that as an excuse. I mean, we've got, and just for the venue thing, like the state of Idaho is getting some fantastic venues now. Like you look at the new venue, the University of Idaho, that new arena, Idaho Central Credit Union Arena, is gorgeous. You still have the Kiwi Dome. You've got Lewis Clark State College has an amazing facility there for a small school arena. North Idaho College is a little bit smaller, but any of the high schools up here, Post Falls High School has an amazing venue. Lake City and Coeur d'Alene are both great venues. Lakeland High School for a 4A has got a great venue. So, I mean, even Moscow High School's got a nice facility too in the Bear Den. So the new Lewiston High School, I mean, I can throw out places all around the state that are great. Lewiston High School is one of the top venues in the state, I think, regardless of size or whatever institution you are. That's a gorgeous facility if you haven't seen it. And so like those places exist all around the state of Idaho. And I know that like Thunder Ridge is amazing. And you have, if you want to throw out football venues, whatever, I mean, Madison is ridiculous on the football side. Like Sandpoint's got a ridiculous facility now. So like, let's stop making some of the old excuses of what used to be the old adage. I get it back in the 80s and early 90s, but things have changed. The internet has changed things for broadcasting rights and everything else. If we're going to make this a level playing field, like let's make it a level playing field for that. Do it for the kids. That's going to make a better experience for the kids.
Yeah, I totally agree. You were talking about you were talking about some of the arenas and facilities that teams can use. I got bored one day and I was just kind of like looking up old newspaper articles about state tournaments from back in the day, late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm trying to remember what year it was. It like 2002, 2001, something like that. Like girls state was held in the Magic Valley. It was held. College of Southern Idaho hosted the big games, and then Jerome hosted some games. Wendell High School hosted some state tournament games, and that's a small 2A school.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're coming out of left field with this. It's been done before.
It has, right? Yeah, it absolutely has. And all of these areas have increased their hotel space. I mean, you look at Lewiston, the Lewis Clark Valley of Clarkson's got hotel space now too. Moscow Pullman, that corridor with the two universities up there has increased their capacity. North Idaho, you even throw in the Spokane Valley. Like there's probably as much hotel space in North Idaho between Coeur d'Alene and Spokane Valley and Post Falls as there is in the Treasure Valley. So, I mean, I don't think we can use that as an excuse anymore other than, oh, well, you only have 3 schools up there, so we don't have to travel up there. Sorry.
Right. And again, people are going to go, well, boy, Spokane to Coeur d'Alene, that's a good half-hour drive. And yeah, hey, guess what? I was over in Boise for state, and the games were in Caldwell.
Boise is like 55 minutes.
Yeah, but the games were in Caldwell. Guess on a good morning how long it takes to get from Boise to Caldwell. It takes about a half an hour.
Yeah.
With no traffic.
If you're going from Eagle to Caldwell, I mean, you have to go up Eagle Road. Like, come on.
Yeah, I just.
So, I mean, there's arbitrary arguments that can be picked apart. Because like up here, it's funny. It's like distance. We use time up here. It's like, oh yeah, it's about 45 minutes. And you're like, okay, so how far is that? Like, oh, that must not be very far. Like 45 minutes. No, we're going about 40 miles. I mean, Coeur d'Alene to Sandpoint takes you about 45 minutes. And people, and like, then you look at it on the map, you're like, oh, you're going like 41 miles. Like, yeah. So it's not like it's terrible to get around. Like, I don't understand that part that people want to complain about that. But I mean, to a certain point, we just got to be like, let's try it. What's it going to hurt to try it for a year or two? I know that you may have agreements with the Idaho Center or something like that for basketball. But try it with some of the other sports and see how it goes. I mean, I think it could be incredible. I don't know why we're trying to stuff everybody in one location. That to me is like one of the only states I know of that does that. And it makes no sense to me. It does not make sense.
Yeah. There's a lot of good talk, good discussion. I don't want to go too long on this, and we can circle back and revisit some of this stuff.
I think we talk about this summer because there's some changes coming for next year with 5A and 4A and league makeups and stuff like that. And this would be a good conversation to talk about.
But I agree with you. There's a lot of people that it's just the way it's always been done. Well,
why?
Hey, it's not 1984 anymore. Like, come on.
I know. I was born that year.
Oh, wow. Okay. I said that because I'm a Van Halen fan. That's like my favorite rock band of all time. Yeah. And of course, what an epic album that is, 1984. But okay, was there anything you had in your notes that you wanted to throw out in terms of solutions that we didn't get to?
No, I mean, I just had really three opportunities, and it was either, obviously changing the district format, which I think makes sense that we could expand districts really easily without screwing with classifications, or getting rid of. I mean, really, the realistic one is get rid of a classification for the time being, until you figure out how to level off that 1A D1, 1A D2 situation where we have so many dang small schools, and that's not fault of their own. Like, that's just the geographic makeup of the state of Idaho. I mean, maybe you try to force more teams into cooperative agreements, but I don't think
that's a whole nother talk for another day.
I'm gonna kick a hornet's nest on that one. But I mean, and then outside of that, it's like, yeah, okay, go to a 16-team expansion and axe the district tournaments. And, then you're telling, okay, do you want to be exposed the week before state? Like, then you're telling teams like District 3, hey, your team's you could travel to Lewiston or Grangeville and you're going to get exposed. How do you feel about that? No, we want to play districts. It's like, okay. I mean, you can't hide behind your league numbers anymore at that point. And so I know the smaller schools outside of some of the areas would love to see that, like the Lakeland, Sandpoint, Moscow, Century, Pocatello, Preston. They would all want that. But the teams like BK and Columbia and Skyview and everybody else, they probably want nothing to do with that. So I know that Andy Harrington's been pretty, for any coach that I've seen, he's talked about expanding the most of anybody, but he's been pretty quiet about it. He's just here and there. But I know that, a lot of the coaches need to see the expansion of something, and whether it's the state tournament or whether it's the districts or the classification situation, something's got to change. And I think in the next, and it's a great time to do it. I think really coming out of the COVID era is a great time to try it. But that's just my 2 cents as some dude that talks on a microphone in North Idaho.
Well, I know you it's kind of like Congress. You are kind of a representative of everybody that lives up north, and these are things we hear from the fans all the time, right?
Yeah.
So you're verbalizing, and I live in East Idaho, and I hear the same things. So we are merely verbalizing what we hear from parents, fans, players, coaches, etc. But
yeah, in 2016, I created a document and tried to submit it to, I don't want to say where, but I submitted it to somewhere in the state of Idaho.
Was it IdahoSports.com?
No, it was not the Idaho. It was actually to a governing body about how to change the classification system in the state of Idaho. And it was literally, I had done the numbers and actually ran it I spent a lot of time on it, getting rid of a classification in the state of Idaho. And it made a ton of sense numbers wise. And obviously enrollments have changed since then. But I could easily do it again. And I kind of hinted at it about taking off the ceiling in 4A and pushing them into 5A. And I know that would create kind of a numbers issue. But it brings up like the Homedales, Fruitlands, Payetts, Weezers, and kind of pushes them into 4A. But like I said, it closes that gap from where it goes from 1279 to where the floor goes to like 1080. So it's 1080 to 500. And so it's like that gap got smaller by over 150 kids. So if we want to level the playing field, that's right where I start. I look at 3A or 2A, and you got to do something with one of the two of those.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you are willing to put in the time and the work to modify that for where we're at now in 2022, let's do it. Let's do an off-season podcast because next week we'll get back into spring sports.
There's a lot of stuff. So track meet coming up at Timberlake, where you've got some big time runners coming in this week. So I'll head to that on Friday, and it'll be interesting to see what we're able to do in North Idaho the next couple of weeks with track. I know that weather's getting warmer. It's supposed to be, it's getting colder before it gets warmer, but we might have snow this weekend.
Speak that into existence, please.
I was looking at the weather and I'm like, oh man, it's like 42 for a high on Saturday.
Yeah, it's still battling the weather for sure. So we're gonna get back into that spring sports flow next week, but we'll do an off-season podcast and maybe crunch the numbers, come up with some new classifications, and we'll build some graphics around it too, and we'll so we can show that to people who are watching it. So
absolutely, I think that'd be a ton of fun. So
but
thanks for giving me a soapbox to stand on today and yell at people from the street corner. So
well, this has been Get Off My Lawn, and we'll be back next week. I think it's good to talk about this stuff, and hey, we want to hear from you, the fans, too. If you listen to this or you watched this and you have comments, send me an email, Brandon at IdahoSports.com, or hit us up on Twitter at Brandon_Baney or at Idaho Game Night. That's Ryan's North Idaho Game Night Twitter account. And let us know. I mean, we want to hear from the fans and what they think about this as well. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Get the conversation started. So, all right. Well, that's enough for one episode, and we'll table the discussion for later on down the line. But thank you for listening to or watching the North Idaho Prepcast. For Ryan Scaggs, I'm Brandon Baney. We'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.